Hey, good morning everybody. We're back in St. Louis again at our favorite spot down here at Dave DSX Tuning, and we're inside the dyno cell. You can see that we've already started last night. We hooked the car up real quickly, and we got right to work because we knew we made a menu of all the things we wanted to accomplish, and already last night we've done that. So as some of you guys recall, being in the dyno here, we're hooked up to a 2 rear hub dyno pulling right here. There's other modules parked around here, so everything's tied down good. We had that all done already. Something fresh and new here is we put the wing back on the car, being in here, and you can see that's back on, so a lot of people haven't seen the wing on the car. In the background, you're going to see over my shoulder here that maybe you didn't see a lot of last time is the actual some dyno stuff. So that's where we pulled the plug last night, is 1,056 horsepower, and I'm going to explain to you how we got there. We probably made a dozen pulls last night, getting some baseline on what we now call the higher compression motor. And what that is, it's a flat top piston now. We like that idea because we want to give it a try. Our dish pistons maybe were giving us some issues with squish area or the lack of. And now with this flat top here, we got complete squish area, higher compression, which methanol is going to enjoy that, or any motor enjoys that to a certain extent. And that's 10 to 1. So not going to hide anything with that. So we've got 10 to 1 pistons in this thing now. And so we want to get some good baseline last night because we got a mechanical change in this car. And we've seen some differences already. And what we're going to do is you're going to follow me back in another room. We're going to talk about what's some of the difference we've seen, which is super high tech. I'll lead you into that, let the cat out of the bag a little bit. We found 4 cylinders that we want to change injection timing immensely, because what we're finding is at 2,000 to 4,200 RPMs, where we got to spool the car, because this big tight torque converter and huge turbochargers, and we get 7 seconds to get this spooled because we're going to drag race heads up. We got to make this happen, so we got to be on the line, we got to be efficient, we got to get this thing done. So it's really important to our program why we're spending so much time at this low RPM. The motor's got to grunt from the bottom, so it's got to make sense. It just can't be a big horsepower Hail Mary thing in the end. So we're spending time, and that's what we did a lot last night. But with all this plex tuning that we got on board right now, we can find what's happening in the cylinder combustion process and find out why it's weak, and we can change it, and we're seeing real changes. And you're going to find that out here in a couple minutes. Super exciting. So with that said, we're running right now the motor to 6,000 RPMs. And what you're seeing is a result here with about 5 pounds of boost. And we're building at the rear hub on an SAE correction factor. We're building about 1,056 horsepower. At the start of the night last night, it wasn't really what we're after, is making horsepower at 5,000 or 6,000 at 5 pounds of boost, but we did move the needle about 10% already, so that's real gains and stuff. So what I want you to do is you follow me in the camera. Let's go out here and talk to Ben and Shane and find out what we're changing on the injection timing. So come and follow me.
Yeah, so last night, we're back to kind of basics, running the engine how we were when we first showed up. Low RPM from maybe 2,000 to about 6,000. And what we're trying to do is work in an area where we can make big changes because we're not at high boost, high horsepower, high RPM, and we can make big errors and we don't have to pay for it with engine damage. So, and that gives us a chance to understand what we're seeing here and make changes and see if we can make things better. So the other advantage that we have in working that area, because this car is a drag race car and it's a turbo, you have to spool the turbos up before you leave the starting line, and the engine has to run against the trans brake, which is effectively like running against the dyno, until it's up to launch RPM. So the better we make the engine in that area, the less time we spend getting the turbos up to boost, the less heat we build in the whole system, and everything about it is better for the race car from the racing aspect of it. So we spent some time last night running the engine. We have our same problem cylinders, 1, 2, 3, and 6, and we spent time trying to understand really what's going on with them, and we made a bunch of changes to try and figure out a way to get around the problems that we're having. One of the changes we made was to move the injection timing to something called closed valve injection, where the intake valve's closed when we spray the fuel in, so the fuel gets to sit on the back of the intake valve and in the port and absorb heat from the runner and vaporize, and that gives it a better chance of combusting when it goes in the cylinder, versus open valve injection where you spray only where the intake valve's open and the airstream's going in and so is the fuel, but there's not as good of an opportunity to mix the fuel with the air. It kind of has to go in all at once. So that really works good at high speed, and maybe not so good at the RPM where we're trying to run it. So we did that change, and that was definitely way better. But in the end, it's taking a bunch of individual cylinder fuel trim to be able to even the cylinders out and make them all run the same in that RPM band. And so we've been spending time mapping the engine, basically, cylinder at a time, to try and get the mixtures right and look at cylinder pressure data to make sure that the changes we're making are improving things. And the proof is in the pudding over here on the dyno screen. You can see where we started in white, and you can see where we ended the night in red and green over here on these two torque and horsepower traces.
Like 40 foot-pounds.
Yeah, so we picked up a whole lot at 2,000, 2,500, where the engine really was just running terribly, and we just made it kind of run like a normal engine. So it's not like we're heroes or doing anything crazy. We're just making it run like it's supposed to, but it's going to pay big dividends when we actually go to use it at the racetrack.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to see the correlation between what you're seeing in pressure in the combustion chamber at any point in the cycle versus I could pick out numbers and go, oh, it looks like 1, 2, 3, maybe 6, and you go, oh yeah, bingo, those are the ones that my lambdas are all messed up. We could make it change, and then you could see what it was happening. And so we were able to go, okay, you can see it in the Motec, I can see it in the combustion data, this is the change we think we need to make, and boom, the thing would make more power. And so it's just a tedious process because the one thing that was working for us is that it was doing the same thing every time. It was always the same cylinders and always the same RPM. So from that we kind of knew that it was a mechanical thing, right? It wasn't like, oh well, you know, maybe the injector's doing this or that. It was very clearly resonant pulses in the header and the manifold. And so I think a lot of times people think cylinder pressure, they think, oh, where's peak pressure happening? And to be honest, we're really not even using that functionality right now. It's like, well, what's happening to the cylinder pressure at the end of the exhaust stroke when the intake valve is opening? Because that's diluting our charge. You can see this cylinder's over here and that cylinder's over there.
Right, so using the Lambda, you can tell that the mixture's rich, but you can't really understand why. But using the cylinder pressure analysis data, and by looking at it not at the peak, but looking at it during the valve events, it gives you a little bit of a window into maybe why it's doing what it's doing.
Well, the reason that's important is because you might spend a lot of time chasing something on your tune-up that you just can't fix on some engines, right? And so we talked a lot about how I think this often happens, especially with race cars, where the goal is let's just hurry up and get to the track and make some runs. And so we just overlook all that stuff, and we've just come to be, programmed that race engines just run bad. And so we've been giving away something like 40 foot-pounds of torque that we didn't have to give away. It just takes patience and perseverance and persistence to go and
right. So the typical line of thinking would be, well, that's, you know, we don't even launch below 4,500, so everything below that doesn't matter as long as it idles. Except that in this case, it has to basically make a dyno pull from idle to get to 4,500 before you can launch.
Yep.
Because it's a turbo.
You've got to spool those turbochargers.
So really, everything from idle all the way to the top of the RPM band matters, and some of it matters more than others. Yep. But getting it to run good between idle and 4,500, the best it can possibly be, is only going to help things when we actually go to the racetrack.
Effectively, we're talking about drivability, which most people go, well, it doesn't matter.
I was going to parlay right to that. The drivability is important to us because this car, you know, runs down the highway at 1,800 RPMs, and we surely want it to be as efficient as we can, you know, for the long drives and stuff like that we want to do, and we have done. So it does really matter to our program. If we're just out seeking world records, which we're trying to do, you know, maybe we got lost in that shuffle in the beginning, but in the end, this, Shane said it best when he said this is our cheapest way of understanding what this motor needs, mechanically speaking, as far as injection timing, the amount of fuel, the amount of spark, and we're better off learning here than we are at a 3,000 horsepower level where we're just beating up parts and wearing them out. So with that said, we're just starting on our second day. We're going to be here all day long, and we're going to get you some more juicy stuff. So you guys stay tuned, and we're going to get you some more video. Thank you for all your support.
Look at green and yellow because those are the two changes from last night. But those are basically the same runs with just cylinder trims. It could be just the temperature because I'm sure everything's not as warm as it was last night. We made a lot of pulls. The problem with being on a chassis dyno.
What's your delta there? Click in the middle where it's fat.
Here?
Yeah, right there. So you're 25 foot-pounds.
Then up here at the top because we didn't make any change to this. So it's likely 20 losses in the drivetrain. Now we should be able to verify that by looking at the cylinder pressure data over there and looking at the torque that it says it has. And in through here, we may be to the point where we can make all the lines look really good, and it really doesn't change how the engine runs.
Yeah.
Because once you've got all 8 contributing something, you've made such a huge gain from some of them not contributing anything that you're not going to pick up a lot there once they're all doing something.
Yeah. So I actually physically felt the motor grab, or the torque converter grabbed the motor that time, and the motor's like, okay, I'm with this, now let's carry the load. Yeah. Before it was like really hesitant. It would skip and hesitate around in there for a little bit. So I said, well,
the cylinder lambdas, the lambdas are a lot more tightly packed than they were. You see all these humps and stuff in the curve, right? But they're grouped a lot tighter because we've done all these individual cylinder trims. So these are individual lambdas on a per cylinder basis, and this is all of them stacked together on top of each other. And we have these humps in here, which indicates the entire engine's going rich or lean. But what we don't have, and we had before, was some going rich and some going lean, and they're all grouped apart in this whole area. So we got them all contributing a lot more. Now we need to move the entire engine to get rid of these humps and valleys, and then it'll be as good as it can possibly be. But once again, once you get them from half of them not running at all to most of them running kind of, there's not a massive change between that and everything perfect.
Huge load, big motor, big turbos, and it's at 2,000, you're pulling this whole, like an overdrive and going, okay, I can do this.
Pretty crazy. I think you have 640 inches and you have 2 98mm turbos, and you can load the car at 2,000 RPM. Like,
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
One of the values that we use a lot for tuning that you probably hear it a lot lately is called CA50. CA stands for crank angle, and 50 stands for we've burned 50% of our mixture in the cylinder. And so we have specific targets we're trying to meet and goals that we have. And ultimately how we need to think about it is we don't have one 8-cylinder engine. What we have is 8 1-cylinder engines that are all doing something a little bit differently. And with the ECU, we have the ability to tune each one individually. And so that's what we've been chasing. We've got 4 cylinders that are all pretty tight, and we've got 4 that at 1 RPM point, because of resonance and things in the intake and exhaust manifolds, they get a little crazy and out of shape. So when we first started out, these are down here at really low RPM, right where you're trying to spool the turbocharger. And previously it was always like, well, it just doesn't run good there. You just kind of have to work your way through it. And what we've been doing is we've been picking on those 4 cylinders and tuning them individually, making them better and better. So when we first started, these humps that you see were way up here like this. It was really hurting the low speed power. And when I say low speed power, a lot of people go, it doesn't matter, it's a drag race car. But the reality is that's what we're using. That power and torque is what you're using to get those turbochargers spooled. So if we take our time now and make that better, it'll make the car drive better. It'll take less time to spool, which means less time to stage the car and get in the beams and be ready to race. So we're working our way there. Shane's over there typing on the keyboard to try and pick out the little fine details in those cylinders. Once we're happy with all that, look, anybody can make a bunch of power. You just turn the wastegates closed and you make a bunch of boosts and the power will go up. We're not worried about that right now. We're trying to make the engine as efficient as possible, and that's what we're doing here. Below this RPM, we can see it's good. Then these 4 cylinders, they kind of get a little out of shape at 3,200. And then for whatever reason, they just come back, and now everybody's fairly happy as we go along here. Each one of these is a cylinder specifically that we're looking at what it's doing in terms of how it burns its mixture, the combustion process, if you will.
So I'm just sitting here comparing the average lambda, which is calculated from the individual cylinder lambdas added together and then divided by the number of lambdas. There are obviously 8. Except in this case, we don't have a lambda in cylinder 4, so it's really 7 lambdas worth of data divided by 7. Anyway, the point is, take that average number and then compare that average number to the individual cylinder lambda and correct the individual cylinder lambda to the individual cylinder lambda average to try and get all the cylinders to match each other, and then you can make major changes to the whole engine curve, right? But to get there, it's a long process. I have to go to a specific RPM, find a cylinder, compare the average lambda, compare the cylinder lambda, do the math on the calculator to figure out how much percentage trim I need to make. So I did that for 1 or 2 iterations, and then it's taking way too long. It's much faster to write a quick math channel in i2 that does all that work for me and just tells me the result. So now I have trim by this cylinder 1, minus 3.35%, trim 2, 1.1, trim 3, 0.8, and so forth. And now I can just go to a specific RPM point in the data, look at the trim, jump back to the ECU, make that trim in that site for that cylinder, and then go to the next cylinder. It'll be a lot faster iterating between runs by using the math channel in I2 to do that.
Gains here, because even by the driver's seat, it's a hell of a thing, because we're starting out with a big load on it, and then the dyno grabs a hold of it, locks up, and all that stuff typically throws a big fit to something. They have a huge load, 100% load, and you're wide open throttle at 2,000. You know, typically it wants to buck at you or not be happy. And this thing is just comfortable saying, give it to me and let's go. And so it's pretty awesome. It's a good run.
Yeah, because that one wasn't that far off before, and the rest of them are reasonably closely grouped, and they are pretty good from 3,800 up. So where's your bad spot?
Same place it's always been, 3,300.
It's 3,300, which is down.
It's funny because I was looking over your shoulder at one point. I just glanced. I'm like, oh, that's a big number. I wonder if just that one wasn't really.
Oh, I could have fat fingered it.
Like
too,
I wasn't really paying attention. Yeah.
Could have done 25 and not 2.5.
These are our new crank sensor bracket. So so we run a sensor for the Motec for crank position, and then we run a sensor for our Plex because it has to understand we're GDC as well. So we have two sensors. They can't be shared. They did not like the signal, sharing the same signal, so we came along, we had to multiply the position and make it beefy enough. So O'Reilly's, if you get this at O'Reilly's, are just slightly different than through this radius right here. And they don't do as good a job right there either, but it's close.
We're working on individual cylinder lambda trims, timing trims. We're trying to understand what's going on with the engine at low RPM. We're using the cylinder pressure, combustion analysis stuff, and the lambda data from the ECU to make all of our lambdas look much more closely grouped together. And we're bringing all of the combustion analysis data in that region closer together also. So we're making the graphs look a lot better in the combustion analysis software and in the engine management data analysis software. However, when you look up there at the data from the dyno, which shows the torque and the horsepower, if you look at those three curves, yellow is the top one, which is where we started. And then we have blue, where we've been kind of in the middle, and then red, which is what we just did, where we have the closest grouping of sensor signals for the fuel mixture and for the combustion pressure, but we have the least amount of actual torque. So we need to do a little bit of a sanity check here and make sure that we're not actually doing exactly what we don't want to do, which is make all the squiggly lines line up like perfect, but actually make the engine run like crap. So what we need to do is jump back to that setup that was the yellow curve and verify whether or not that jumps right back up there and matches the yellow curve, or it's still down here somewhere where the red and blue ones are. In other words, maybe some other process is happening that's made the horsepower drop, even though we're making the engine run better. Because audibly and to Rod, it feels better, but the dyno doesn't agree.
Happens with dyno tuning in general, right? It's not a dyno brand or a type of dyno, meaning engine or roller or hub dyno. So often things change from day to day, and so what we were experiencing is you start chasing your tail going, but that one run we made yesterday made more power than we're making today. And so what did we do? How did we mess that up? Well, there's a couple ways that we attacked it from identifying what the issue is. One, we put the exact same tune-up that we had yesterday that made that power in it today, and it did nothing. It made exactly the same power as we were already making today. So we know that whatever the change is isn't tune-up. The other thing that we can do is we can go in and we can take all the corrections out. So take your weather and you just look at the raw power that it was making, and when we compared those runs, it's like, okay, it's not something we're doing to the tune-up, it's just the difference between days. And that's good, because now what we can do is say, okay, we're gonna take that run we just did and that becomes our benchmark for today, so we can see the changes that we're making and how they're affecting the engine's performance right now today. So keep in mind, the number that pops out in the dyno is just a number relative to whatever the dyno corrections it sees that day. But what we're doing in the laptop matters, because that's gonna vary as we go out to the racetrack as the actual weather conditions we race in change. So we're not going to get really carried away chasing just a dyno number, especially not a peak number. We're looking for the average across the curve, and we're looking for the direct comparison back to back on what it just did on those runs.
Go edit the firmware and add any number of sites. I could add 2,000 sites in if I wanted to do that. I mean, it might not be a good idea to do it, but I can do it. And so now it's recompiling the firmware, and at some point it'll generate a new package with those updated number of sites for the V table like that. And now we have a firmware upgrade, so we'll do a firmware upgrade, migrate to the new version. It's version 20. See if we can bring the cylinder pressure stuff back up in that bad spot. But
Back up in that back spot?
What I mean, bring it down, bring the shank part down, bring the torque back up. Finally did something better, back-to-back runs with more changes in timing and individual cylinder trims, and we finally have the blue line is the one we just did, and we finally picked up that lower area that we've been struggling with, so that's good. So now we have the dyno graph matches the air-fuel ratios, individual cylinder air-fuel ratios, and it matches the cylinder pressure data, so that's nice that they all correlate. Earlier we were making those things better and this was getting worse, which always makes you feel like you are going the wrong way, which is why we did that sanity check earlier. We put back last night what seemed to be the best and it was still bad. So it's the reference of today that's different. We finally have done something where all three agree and it's better. So that's nice.
One, 3, and 8.
Okay.
Need 4 conservatively.
8 super rich, so I'm thinking I should clean 8 out.
Okay, so that's fine. You can still do both with 4 instead of the 7 or 8 I think it needs.
What do you think about cylinder? What's cylinder 4 doing?
4 looks good.
4 looks good. What about 7?
7 is ever so slightly. Yeah, 7 needs a little.
Needs a little timing or fuel?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I can't tell you what fuel is, but it needs the combustion to move up.
It needs to go faster.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's already the leanest one there.
Issue ever on 1357 bank. It's always 4 or number 6.
Huh.
Just keep that in mind. I'm going to check a plug. We haven't looked at it for a while. So now we're running up to 8,000 RPMs. And no boost in the motor. It's making like 5 pounds on purpose, so we can just see what the combustion process, what the physical elements of the cylinder head wants with that piston in there on methanol. And we're looking at what kind of lead and fuel. And so we're just starting to trim with that just now. We just made our first pull. So what I want to do is I want to look at the plugs to give us the old timers way of looking at things, just to make sure what the data says and what the plugs do, that they correlate with each other. So I'm going to pull a couple plugs.
Six is your hottest one, your fastest burner.
I think we should back some out of 6.
We are indeed going to make some changes. We're going to get after it in a couple cylinders and probably wall up the ship on number 6 and take a little bit out just to stay cautious on that. This motor is, if we ever have an issue, it's always on the 2, 4, 6, 8 bank. It seems like 1, 3, 5, 7 is always friendly, and that's obviously we're going to get a little more aggressive with it. This was a fork truck in Las Vegas where I think it was, you found on a Spintron, something was going on at 57 or 6,300. It's like there's a, abnormally here that is not working correctly. It's like there's a function of some vibration that just, the valve was not happy. And it's like, it's strange. It's like, it's there, it's real.
Yeah.
And then pick up the phone, talk to Shane. He's like, yeah, I had a 2 and throw it out all the time. He goes, there's a dead spot in here. You can't do anything about it. Then it comes back around again, and then it goes right back in the toilet again. And there ain't no toilets there, is there? No more fork trucks, no more taxis. The boys are doing a good job. Obviously, you can see how the number just keeps increasing. We're not giving it any more ingredients to increase. We're just making the bad things less bad, if you can say that. We're picking on the weak things is what we're actually doing here. That's actually all we've been doing for the last day, is getting rid of all the weak stuff and finding out what's wrong and fixing that. We're not trying to make it, the fastest thing you can do is come in here and turn the CO on 2 and just throw about 100 pounds of boost in this thing, and we'll be eating lunch in 5 minutes and be all done with it. It doesn't get us anywhere, and that's unfortunately what a lot of people that don't have resources like we have here are forced to do. They just don't have the ability to be in a dyno room and have a facility like this and this technology to really understand it. So they're unfortunately gonna have to do a Hail Mary. If that doesn't work, get the checkbook again, try some more, and a lot of people never get there. Their whole life is a journey of just being stuck. And we were stuck. I mean, we have a lot of resources here. We've been stuck for 5 or 6 years, and now, and just even the last dyno session we were here about a month and a half ago, we were stuck. We came back, we took a look at the data and said, listen, this flame travel, this cylinder combustion process is not completing itself. It's falling flat. No matter what we do, you cannot put a Band-Aid on this. You have to give it what it needs to complete that whole process, and not just cut that last quarter out of the whole process, or 1/3. So with that said, this is the fruit of our labor. Now with that whole process, you can actually dictate what that motor is going to do, and that's exactly what they just did. We knew that was going to pick up like that because it was responding to a command, and that's what's making this whole thing fun, and that's why I'm doing it. And that's why we all wanted to do it, really.
Journey, right?
It's the journey, bro. Actually not even nosing off until maybe 8,000, 7,900 RPMs. It's holding itself in there, so I think it's a good motor. I think this higher compression is exactly what we needed. So far so good.
So when you asked me what I was doing all during lunch, because I was the only one over here working on a laptop, everyone else was over there eating. The process of adjusting the mixture in each cylinder at each different RPM point is very, very time consuming. You got to look at a value, make an adjustment, make a calculation, take that value, enter it into the table, go to the next cylinder, and you got 8 cylinders worth, and you've got multiple RPM columns that you're trying to adjust. So in order to automate that a little bit, I took some time to do some math channels in the analysis software that would let me take the trim amount that was currently being delivered for a particular cylinder, and then multiply that trim amount that it's currently using by the error between the existing air-fuel ratio and the average air-fuel ratio of all 8 cylinders, so that I could have a report that I could export to Excel and then grab that trim line from Excel and drop it back into the ECU. And that speeds the process up by quite a bit. And the value of doing that is we've managed to get all the lambda traces closer to the average. So, if you look at all the color, all the white ones are the ones from the previous run, and they're a little bit further off as far as their individual mixture compared to the average. And so by automating it a little bit, we're able to more quickly get back to every cylinder contributing to the average of all 8, and then contributing the average of the whole engine so that we can get all those cylinders playing the same as far as the mixture goes.
So your new table, by blending it, yielded you additional.
Yeah, so this is just the difference between doing it as a human being would do it. Go look at a spot, look what the error is, make the calculation, go find the spot on the table, enter that value, go to the next spot. This is, okay, export all the trims it's doing now, export the, do a math on that versus the error, apply that to the trim, export that to a table in Excel that you can then just grab the entire line all the way along the RPM column, right? And then puke that back into the cylinder trim.
Yep.
So by doing that, it's just a lot, you can get the whole spread a lot faster.
Sure. And then
Now,
all 21 spots get done versus you picking that 5 and not seeing another 15.
It took me a solid hour and a half to get that set up, but now in between runs, I can probably get us all 8 cylinders trimmed in 5 or 10 minutes, where it was taking me 30 or 40 minutes before.
In that, you know, maybe at last 500 RPMs, it creeped up a half pounder back pressure change, but ultimately it's pretty stout when it's flat up high. It's got the good right ingredients, you know. We're doing what we're doing because, you know, we got to go ahead and be able to run the car up to 8,000 or 8,400, shift it. It'll pull back to 65, 6,700 and run it back up again. Then if we run 270 and a quarter mile, we're going to be up at 8,500 RPMs, you know, with a 36-inch tire with the big gear that we pull anyway. Just got out of the room, so you know, like I told you before, you wait for the time where you have the ability just to add horsepower and it was free. So Shane went on over here, he turned this knob up and added 12 pounds of boost, a healthy 12 pounds, and it yielded us 900 horsepower. So it's coming out to about 70 some horsepower per pound of boost. So right now we're probably in a sweet spot of these turbochargers. And until we get close to the point where we start building, you know, excessive heat by spinning them out of their comfort zone, we're going to probably find this lineal pattern just a little bit longer here, or hopefully we do anyway. So it's pretty exciting here. So it's going to be jumping, you know, like this 500 horsepower type of thing, or 750 horsepower for a while here. But we have time, we have resources, and we're not going to rush it.
So one of the things that we're really happy about is we spent a lot of time, pretty much 3/4 of our entire day, just working on the individual cylinder tuning. That's lambda and spark timing, to try to get the cylinders as equalized as possible. So we got that to where our tune-up was very, you know, something we were really proud of. But the question became, well, what's going to happen when we turn up the boost and we change the ratio between our boost and our back pressure? And frankly, nobody knows. And one thing we're kind of happy to see here, at least on the first try, is we went from, you know, 4 or 5 pounds of boost up to about 17 or so. And so far you can see our little package of lines here, all the cylinders have stayed together. So that means the individual trims that we're using are the same amount of trim that it needs as our boost goes up. We just have a different amount of total advance required. So we're assuming that that's going to change once we start getting a big boost to back pressure ratio out of control. But the only way to know is keep testing and find out.
Through the data, and we're looking at the CA50 number, which is kind of the indicator of where the ignition advance needs to be. How much, where, at what point in the cycle have you burned 50% of the mass? So we can see that number is growing as RPM goes up, which means we're burning later and later in the cycle, which means you generally need to advance the ignition timing to get that closer to the optimum number. But instead of doing that, we thought, let's just change the mixture and run a leaner mixture. I mean, I know from experience that the mixture we were trying to run at the boost we're at is probably too rich for peak power. So without changing anything else, all we did was change the mixture. And there's the difference you can see in the 2 power curves. Blue being the leaner mixture, the second pull, white being the richer mixture, and that big wiggle at the very end, you know, was rich enough on the run before that it was starting to miss. So some of that gain is because it was missing on the first pull, but still you can look everywhere where it wasn't missing, and it's definitely a better number to run. So now we can investigate what we get at that air fuel ratio by changing the ignition advance and seeing what we can do with the CA50 number at that point with the timing.
We're just keeping an eye on the spark plugs, make sure everything's burning well on the air fuel mixture, make sure we have no leaks, all the belts and everything are staying on and nothing's breaking and blowing up. Yeah, I'm a crew chief. I also take care of the car. I follow the car wherever it goes, mainly work on it at home. I think our pan's a little jacked.
Oh, the engine pan. So
Yep.
so maybe it already had a kind of a big puddle right there of engine oil.
Yep.
And
now
now we have tranny fluid too, huh?
Yep.
And it's all fucking over in here. It's coming out the top of something, the breather.
The breather?
Yeah, it's sprayed all over the top of the bell housing.
So there couldn't be any of that. That's the first time where we did that.
Unless it
The
was
backlash.
when it was over full. And
It
that's
is
the first
over full.
I know, and that's the first time we revved it up enough to get it to puke everything out. Because to me it's dripping on top of the bell housing and on top of the case.
Right,
It
yeah.
looks to me like it came out of the breather, but there's too much oil on the ground for it to be what I see on top. Maybe it's coming out of two places.
Here's some update. We've been banging on this thing. We're about 51 runs into this thing, and what a tremendous progress here. So as we step into this, we know we can predict what it's going to do. In doing that, we've been picking smart places to stop and try this. So in this whole thing, we got to a level of about 34 pounds of boost, or like Shane calls it, 2 atmospheres. So just remember, he came from Uranus about 3 days ago.
I can't see a thing.
Can't
Well,
see
you gotta
it.
use your open eye, dude.
Yeah, you gotta use the other eye. So he's looking for a Higgins eye clam or something in there. So
I think I got some
we've been working on this, and we got to this
China.
power level of 34 pounds of boost, and we're at that point in time we got a number, and we're like, okay, now let's look at the tuning. We have all the data right here. We can make this a lot better. So we stopped at that threshold, knowing that was our next frontier, if you will. And we stood there, and from that point in time we got there, is it 500 horse or close to it?
474.
474 horsepower is what these guys tuned at the same boost level, same RPM, just by tuning. So I also want you to know that this is a paid advertisement by Shane Tecklenburg and Ben Streer.
I was about to qualify that by saying
yeah.
I fucked it up really bad first, so you would think it was awesome
Yeah.
when I fixed it.
Yeah.
Low hanging fruit, baby.
Yeah, low hanging fruit,
I found the
man.
problem.
Yeah, watch this. I'm going to dazzle Rodney here. So, no, it's actually wonderful. It's back to, I think we got the right recipe, and you know what? A blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while, and I'm just so happy. Ben, what do you want to add to this thing? It just, well, I don't think we could have really I don't really think we would have been brave enough and risky enough at 3,000 horsepower to go ahead and take another degree out of something unless.
Well, like Shane and I were just talking before the video was on, like how traditionally you have just rule of thumbs. You got a formula. You know, I use this much timing for this much boost, and I take out this much more as the boost goes up. But almost every time I've done this exercise where I actually have combustion data and I can actually run the engine on a dyno and see, I find that all those old like rule of thumb, wives' tale formulas are great if you just want to be safe. But when you start talking about making the engine more efficient, they're a little too conservative. And so you really never know where the edge is, you know, and so we're really cautiously and slowly sneaking up on that tune-up. But it's a catch-22, right? So normally it's how many times can we run the engine before we break a valve spring or we have a, you know, some issue with the engine.
That's a great point.
And so with this engine, we've been able to go run after run after run after run, and literally I think we've made 40 or 50 runs, and we've checked the lash twice, and it just goes like it's a streetcar, man. Like,
yeah,
we made it do that. And so the benefit is it's allowed us, you know, a lot of times you know you're not trying to find the edge of the Grand Canyon with a blindfold on. You know, if you're going to do that, you're going to be sneaking up on it and not just taking big steps. But
that's
because
right.
we have, you used the term earlier, we have all these resources, and that means the dyno, that means the data acquisition and the ECU, that means the combustion analysis, right? All 8 cylinders of lambdas, EGTs, all of the information together between Shane's tuning and knowledge and my experience with the combustion, we're getting results that we've never been able to get before with these engines. And they are way more efficient than they've ever been. I mean, check it out. We're within about 500 horsepower, okay?
That's
at
right.
34 pounds of boost, we're within about 500 horsepower where we were before with the same turbos, but at 76 pounds of boost. All from making the engine more efficient.
So we have another 40 pounds of boost we could add onto this thing just to get another 500 horsepower out of it. That's, so you know we're going to make that threshold for sure. Easily. So this is all the things that you've always hoped that you could always do. Get all the right ingredients in place and just watch it all happen.
All right, people.
And well, I didn't really say that. You said that.
We don't have that.
Right, well soon, yeah. So it's a wrap for the first day. Tremendously successful. We got a hell of a program going on here, and I'm proud of everybody. And we've already learned so much that it's already tremendous success with this higher compression and everything else that we've done to it. We're pulling the spark plugs right now, checking everything over. We're trying to maybe prepare for tomorrow here, so getting our things ready to go and getting an order checklist type of thing. So thanks everybody for your support and tuning in, and stay in touch. Thank you.